Welcome back, Headliner Nation. Today is my final video for my volume versus efficiency series, and today we're going to be talking about the most efficient tight ends in all of football last season. I've already done volume and efficiency for running backs and wide receivers. The volume video for tight ends has been done. Today, we're wrapping up the series, one of my favorite series that I do every single off season. And I just want to remind everybody real quick before we start diving into all of the information, our 2025 Fantasy Football Draft Guide is already available. It is chock full of a ton of rookie and dynasty content already. So regardless of what type of league you play in, you're already going to be finding a ton of information that you can utilize to really start learning about the next group of NFL superstars. But the redraft content will start to pile up very quickly. In fact, when I get done with this video, I'm going to start recording player profiles. The draft guide is going to get big, ladies and gentlemen, and you're going to want to have access to it before all of that information starts dropping so you can start preparing for your season now. It is the best deal that you can get in the fantasy football industry today. I guarantee you that you're not going to find a better bang for your buck bargain in the industry than what we offer with our 2025 Fantasy Football Draft Guide. There's a link in the description down below. Head on over to tfhdraftguide.com. Get yours ordered right now. It is digital. There's videos, downloadable PDFs, rankings, my exclusive dynamic running back rating, and a lot of other content to come. And by the way, it updates consistently until week 1 of the NFL season, so you never fall behind all of the latest breaking news. Today, though, it's all about the tight ends. Let's jump into our first category when we talk about efficiency, and it's going to be yards per target. The very first name in this category is going to be one that shows up at the top quite a bit today, and it's George Kittle. And there's going to be an argument all offseason whether it's George Kittle, Trey McBride, or Brock Bowers is the tight end one. As good as Trey McBride is, as good as Brock Bowers is, it's still going to be George Kittle for me. He has been fantastic for several years now, and I don't feel like he gets enough love. I feel like he is consistently overlooked. People have an issue with games that he misses. People have an issue with, at the beginning of the career, he was a little too big game dependent. He wasn't as consistent as could be. But this offense this season, even with Christian McCaffrey back, is going to be looking for a leader in the passing game. And for me, it's George Kittle. Brandon Ayuk might not be fully healthy. You're going to have Juwan Jennings, yes, and Ricky Pearsall, yes. But you got rid of Deebo Samuel, and Christian McCaffrey, even though he's, and we'll say healthy, he's not going to see the same workload that we're used to. Probably specifically in the passing game. George Kittle could end up having a huge year. Another name that's going to be interesting to keep an eye on throughout this video is Tucker Kraft, and I'm going to have more to say about him a little bit later on. He comes at number 2. A guy like Mark Andrews, a big red zone target, really last year was made by touchdown. Surprising to see him so high. Dallas Goedert, for as much volume as he got last year, which wasn't a ton, he was pretty darn good with the volume that he got. Sam Laporta, Pat Freiermuth is another one that's a little bit surprising for his yards per target being so high. Some guys that kind of shocked me on the back end, however, David Njoku. I was quite surprised that his yards per target were so low. A lot of that probably had to do with the fact that, again, they dealt with a carousel of quarterbacks last season, and that is why David Njoku had that issue with yards per target. If Joe Flacco wins the starting job this year, I expect that number to get a whole lot higher. If it's Kenny Pickett, it could end up being right here once again. And yards per target under 6 for your tight end is going to limit some upside. Dalton Kincaid is another name that is very concerning, and we'll talk about him more as this video comes through. But I am starting to think that Dalton Kincaid may be the next Kyle Pitts, and not in a good way either. What about yards per reception? What was a big difference in guys that saw a lot of yards per target, and what did that do to their yards per reception? Some of the biggest differences The first one is going to be Kyle Pitts, 3rd in yards per reception, but only 8th in yards per target. Definitely a guy that when he was making plays, which didn't seem to be very often, he's a tight end that makes some bigger types of plays. And it's really about consistency with him. But at this point, I don't think we can draft him Kyle Pitts this, Kyle Pitts that. Breakout year incoming. Has to be better than he was last year. He continues to be as good, if not worse, than he was in all previous years at this point. Kyle Pitts, regardless of what the numbers say, I can't get on board with it. Isaiah Likely, he went from 10th in yards per target up to 7th in yards per reception. He's always going to be capped by Mark Andrews. As long as Mark Andrews is there, Isaiah Likely is going to be a guy that's going to have a really big game. People are going to spend high waiver priorities on him and a whole lot of fab, and then he's going to disappear again after that. TJ Hockenson, 18th in yards per target, 8th in yards per reception. The yards per target, with him being fully healthy this year, I would say probably starts to tick back up. He's definitely a guy that could be had at a discount this year. Noah Fant goes from 16th all the way up to 12th. It'll be interesting to see how he is utilized. Hunter Henry goes from 20th to 16th. Dalton Kincaid from 27th to 17th. So, hey, a little bit of a bump up there for new Kyle Pitts, or maybe Diet Kyle Pitts. What's a good nickname for Dalton Kincaid to compare him to Kyle Pitts? That's what I want to know down in the comments below. Cole Kmet and Pat Freiermuth, though. You can even talk about Jonnu Smith. All these guys went backwards. And yards per target, they were ranked way higher than their yards per reception. Cole Kmet went from 7th to 19th. Jonnu Smith from 12th to 20th. And Pat Freiermuth from 6th to 21st. So while I mentioned for a guy like Pat Freiermuth, it was kind of shocking to see him that high. Now when you take a look at yards per reception, not that shocking. It goes back to kind of where we were looking at. He's a big red zone threat, but he's not really a guy that's going to be utilized as a big play type of tight end. Moving on to yards after the catch per reception. If you watch these videos, you know these statistics that talk about what a player does after he gets the ball are some of my favorite stats to talk about. So where are some of the biggest differences in terms of what a player saw from yards per target to reception to what they actually did after the catch? Dalton Kincaid. Now, this is why I'm not ready to completely write off Dalton Kincaid. I don't love him. I'm not really interested in investing in him. And outside of this, there's not a ton of positives. But when you take a look at Dalton Kincaid, he was 27th in yards per target. He was 17th in yards per reception. Now he's all the way up to 3rd to yards after the catch per reception. So is it Dalton Kincaid? Is it the offense? Are they not utilizing him correctly? There's a lot of things with Dalton Kincaid that just don't make a ton of sense. And I really can't be invested in him until we start to see him move forward in a positive manner. But if you're looking for positives and you're looking for something to say, hey, invest in him, it is absolutely his playmaking ability after he gets the ball in his hands. But maybe we're just not seeing him utilized correctly enough. Will Dissly goes from 17th to 25th all the way up to 6th. It'll be interesting to see how the tight end dynamic there in LA works out this year. He was a guy that was kind of up and down at times last year. He was fantasy viable at one point, kind of disappeared, definitely dealt with some injuries. Not really a consistent playmaker, though. Jonnu Smith, 12th in yards per target, 20th in yards per reception, all the way up to 7th in yards after the catch per reception. So Jonnu Smith showing that playmaking ability. When you get him the football, regardless of where it's at on the field, he's going to pick up yards for you. The question this year is really going to be if Jalen Waddle is healthy, if Tyreek Hill is healthy, if Tua is healthy, and with maybe trying to get back to running the football a little bit more often, Devon Achane getting targets out of the backfield, how well is Jonnu Smith actually going to be utilized? And there's even talk of Jonnu Smith potentially being traded before the season as well. Don't love that, especially if it's to Pittsburgh. But for Jonnu Smith, he's definitely one of those volatile tight ends this year. The upside, like we saw last year, is definitely going to be there, but the floor could be much lower because we haven't seen it consistently either. Jake Ferguson, I love this for Jake Ferguson. 29th in yards per target, also 29th in yards per reception, 11th in yards after the catch per reception. Injuries were a big issue with him last year. George Pickens taking people down the field, CeeDee Lamb being his normal self. Jake Ferguson could find himself with some really solid targets this year, and maybe they're not deep down the field. Maybe the yards per target and the yards per reception stay about the same, but his yards after the catch per reception will allow him to establish a pretty solid floor if the volume just isn't as high as we would like. Juwan Johnson, he's kind of a negative mover, him and Mark Andrews. Why is that? Well, it's because how they're utilized in the red zone. 9th, and 20th for Juwan Johnson, 3rd, 4th, and 28th for Mark Andrews. Mark Andrews, tight end superstar last year when it came to touchdowns, especially considering the fact he was the guy that was dropped by a lot of fantasy players to begin last year. He was so bad last year at the beginning of the season. It was crazy to see how strongly he ended the year. But him and Juwan Johnson kind of share that similarity and that they're really being looked at in the red zone. So while their yards per target and yards per reception may not be that bad, those are guys that they're going down pretty quickly after that, especially if it's in the end zone, right? It could be a decent target, it could be a decent reception, but you're not picking up any yards after you catch the ball in the end zone. And that's probably one of the reasons why they are so low. A new stat that we added this year for the pass catchers in the efficiency videos: drop percentage. Now, I didn't include drops as a whole in the volume video, and the reason for that is because it greatly skewed the outcome of the video. It was evidentially clear that at the wide receiver position, when you added in drops, there were some guys, just the more targets they had, the more drops that they had, but it really did give us a clear view on the guys who don't have a ton of drops regardless of the amount of volume they get. With the tight ends, it was the complete opposite. The more volume you had, the more drops you had, and it wasn't even close. So because of that, it skewed that video completely to the point where I couldn't even include it because it was going to really mess with the numbers. Drop percentage, though, when it comes to efficiency is way better, and we can definitely get a much clearer view on what drop percentage looks like for these tight ends when we don't just include them as a whole, but mix it in with the amount of volume that they were getting and really what that average is. Tyler Conklin, Austin Hooper, no drops last year. 0 drop percentage. For Tyler Conklin, that's not bad because he's going to be a guy that is going to be looking to make an impact in a new offense. And if he can become a quarterback's best friend and he's getting those targets and you don't have to worry about him not making plays, Tyler Conklin could end up seeing some more targets. A guy like Sam Laporta, good to see him up here. Obviously, slow start to the season last year, but Sam Laporta finished pretty strong. Will be interesting to see how he looks this season as well. Hunter Henry, Trey McBride is the biggest one because, again, he is one of those top tight ends. And you're taking a look at Brock Bowers, Trey McBride, and George Kittle. Trey McBride finishes 5th with a 1.8 drop percentage. George Kittle, he finishes 11th with a 2.5 drop percentage. Brock Bowers finishes 15th with a 3.4 drop percentage. And then when you take a look down the line here, Travis Kelce and Jonnu Smith are really the two players that had the most volume, but then also had the highest drop percentage to go along with it. Travis Kelce, he's going to have to get a lot better this season. His ceiling may not be what we're used to with him, but he saw so much volume last year, and is probably still going to be depended upon by Patrick Mahomes. He should end up being much better. Now that you don't have to spend like a top 5 tight end pick on him, he might actually be worth it. What about contested catch rate? Which tight ends are doing the best in traffic, whether it be in the end zone, over the middle of the field, whatever? Pat Freiermuth. Now, Pat Freiermuth is uber talented. Pat Freiermuth, unfortunately, has found himself with a revolving door of quarterbacks and incompetent offensive coordinators. That's why Pat Freiermuth, to me personally, really hasn't had the type of season that I think he is capable of having. But when you take a look at what he does, contested rate, when you take a look at what he does in the end zone, when you take a look at his ability to create yards after the catch, which unfortunately he didn't do that much last year, but we've seen him do all right in the past, he's a guy that can make plays for any offense as long as you're utilizing him correctly. Now, the good thing for Pat Freiermuth this season you don't really have a lot of established weapons. You do have DK Metcalf, but DK Metcalf is going to be new to Aaron Rodgers. Pat Freiermuth is going to be new to Aaron Rodgers, so at least you have that. But then behind him, now that you've gotten rid of George Pickens, you don't have a ton of guys that just pop out on the page as the number 2 target in this offense. They're going to run the football quite a bit. That is definitely going to happen. But listen, Arthur Smith, he's a pain in everybody's butt. Steelers fans, fantasy owner fans, probably even his own family at this point, kidding aside. We don't know what he's going to do. We have no idea what Arthur Smith is going to do. We have no idea who's going to be the guy or what schemes he's going to concoct, because without Derrick Henry and A.J. Brown, Arthur Smith has been terrible as a head coach and an offensive coordinator. And then Aaron Rodgers, he was not good last season. And is he going to be able to take a step forward and get back to maybe not the Aaron Rodgers of old, but at least something similar to it? If he can, and he can be a top 15 quarterback, Pat Freiermuth definitely has way more opportunity this season. I really like Pat Freiermuth this year, and I hope this is his breakout season finally. Now, this is where things get interesting when we talk about the top tight end that should be drafted next season. George Kittle ranked 4th in red zone target percentage at 29.3. Trey McBride, even though he only scored 2 touchdowns last season and the Cardinals waited until the end of the season to make it happen, he was 10th at 24.5. So it's not like Arizona wasn't trying to get Trey McBride the ball. They were doing it. He just wasn't successful, whether it be Kyler Murray or he was stopped short or whatever it may be. They were utilizing him in the red zone. Brock Bowers was 24th at 17.6%. Now, you're going to make an argument for Brock Bowers that this number is going to get better with Geno Smith as the quarterback this season. And that's fine. That's a pretty legitimate argument. And I will say that, yes, with Geno Smith at quarterback, Brock Bowers should see an increase. But a counterpoint to that will be in a better running game. Ashton Genty is going to be utilized in the red zone quite a bit as well. They might not be passing the ball nearly as much as they used to, especially in the red zone. And if that happens, even if we do see a little bit of an increase for Brock Bowers, can we just assume that it's going to shoot up into the top 10 or even the top 4 like George Kittle? George Kittle, he's in honestly a better situation to see just as good of red zone targets that he did last year with Deebo Samuel being gone. Trey McBride, not a lot has changed for him in terms of what we'll see in the red zone. You've got Marvin Harrison Jr., who might see a little bit more, but it's not going to be enough to take away from Trey McBride. Brock Bowers has a little bit better of a situation with the quarterback position, but he has a beast of a running back now where they used a top 10 pick on to make their offense better. Brock Bowers, to me, right now, may need to be looked at as tight end 3, and this right here is a big reason why. Let's take a quick look at yards per route run. Just going to touch on a couple of players here real quick. One guy that's towards the top of the list is Isaiah Likely. Now, DeAndre Hopkins has been added to the wide receiver mix. You still have Zay Flowers. You have Rashad Bateman, who you just signed to an extension, and you still have Mark Andrews. While we know the big playability that is there for Isaiah Likely, and we know when he's out on the field, there's a chance that he could see a decent amount of targets, Isaiah Likely really is not a fantasy viable tight end unless Mark Andrews were to go down for an injury. And me personally, I don't want to draft Isaiah Likely waiting for an injury all season long. So Isaiah Likely is kind of the first name here where yards per route run, we're definitely seeing a decent amount of yards picked up for every route he is running. He's just not going to see as many routes as what we would like. Now, when we go towards the bottom of the list, a guy like Jake Ferguson, we definitely need to see get better. And hopefully this year we do see an increase with George Pickens drawing some guys down the field. CeeDee Lamb obviously obviously being a really tough guy to keep a hold on. The big thing for me will be the run game. If the run game can be successful with the guys that they have currently to be able to bring those linebackers up a little bit, then you've got a cornerback and a safety going with George Pickens. You've got a cornerback also going with CeeDee Lamb, a safety trying to keep an eye on CeeDee Lamb to help out. Now Jake Ferguson can find a lot of sweet spot right behind the linebackers and right in front of the defensive backs, where he could see maybe not his volume tick up, but his efficiency and his big playability tick up. Fantasy points per snap. And to see guys like Jonnu Smith, George Kittle at the very top, guys that play a ton of snaps and also had a ton of fantasy points to go with it, that's awesome, because sometimes you see, yeah, guys are playing a ton of snaps, but they're not scoring a ton of fantasy points. These guys are doing both of those things. Mark Andrews is up this high because of his touchdowns. Mike Gesicki is an interesting one. He is a guy that might be able to be utilized in Cincinnati after he re-signed there. Depending on the matchup, your main guys are going to be obviously T. Higgins and obviously Jamar Chase. So if we're looking at him as the number 3 target, assuming that Chase Brown doesn't see a huge uptick in volume out of the backfield in the passing game, if he's the number 3 target in a pass-heavy game, Mike Gesicki could also be worth it this year. Might not score a ton of touchdowns, so we got to hope for a decent amount of volume. When we go back to that, who's the top tight end, agreement, disagreement, conversation once again, Trey McBride finishing, 0.1 fantasy points behind Brock Bowers while only scoring 2 touchdowns. If Trey McBride had scored 5 or 6 touchdowns, he quite possibly would have been all the way up to number 1 on this list. So Trey McBride for me still is number 2 right behind George Kittle. I really like what these 2 guys are going to do this year. I like Brock Bowers a lot as well. I don't know if the volume will be as high as it was last season with an increased running game. And I also don't love the touchdown potential for Brock Bowers this season as much as maybe I did last year either. Tucker Kraft and Isaiah Likely. When we dive into fantasy points per touch, that's when these guys start popping up a lot more often, because when they are getting the ball, they're doing some decent things with it. It's just a wonder of how often are they going to get the football. And Isaiah Likely, we've already talked about quite a bit. For Tucker Kraft, I want to talk about him when we go over the overall scoring of this. Guys like Kyle Pitts are popping in here as well, because generally for the most part, when he does get a decent amount of volume, he does some good things with it. And a lot of that comes from, yes, he puts together big plays from time to time. He's just not doing it consistently enough. And you got to wonder if Michael Penix is going to look his way more often. A guy like Pat Freiermuth being up here, again, maybe not seeing a ton of volume, but doing some decent things with the volume he is getting. Guys that drop to the very end of the list is a guy like Travis Kelce. And when you look at his points per touch, you can see he doesn't have the same upside that he used to have, but the volume alone is going to give him a decent enough floor that if you're drafting for a tight end that's going to give you maybe 6 or 7 fantasy points per week, if that's kind of your floor, if you say, if I can find a tight end that can give me that, it doesn't feel like a lot, but I don't have to worry about will he or won't he, or having 2 or 3 tight ends on your roster that you're trying to figure out every single week. Travis Kelce, knowing that he's not getting a ton of fantasy points per touch, okay, I get it. You're going to say, well, he's not worth the draft pick anymore. But when you look at his volume overall and you look at his score kind of here at the end of things when we talk about everything, you got to wonder if I draft him as my tight end 1, but I draft him as like the tight end 10 or 11 overall, those odds aren't all that bad for a guy that has a great relationship with his quarterback. All right, let's go ahead and talk about overall score now. And the lower the score, the better, because it means you ranked higher in multiple categories across the board. Now, there's going to be a few guys that obviously we spent quite a bit of time talking about in this video, and I probably don't need to dive into it anymore, but let's start with like George Kittle. We've talked about him a lot. He's number 1 in the rankings here. No shock, he's my tight end 1. Sam Laporta it is good to see him finish so high. After a huge rookie season, there was a lot of disappointment with some inconsistencies and a slow start to the season for Laporta. A lot of that has to do with just Jameson Williams playing a lot better last season than what he had. And then, of course, the running game with Jahmyr Gibbs having just an absolutely fantastic season as well. David Montgomery back there. Amon-Ra St. Brown, of course. Even a guy like, take a look at what Tim Patrick did at times last year, especially towards the end of the season. He even had a role in that offense as well. So we'll see what Sam Laporta does. He might be a guy where some of that ceiling starts to come down, but his efficiency is so good, it could give him a decent floor every single week. We've talked about Mark Andrews. He really scores very high, which is kind of crazy considering his season started so horribly. And then it was a lot of touchdown-based statistics to go with it. He's still yards per target, yards per reception, contested catch rate, red zone target, yards per route run, still finished very high across the board. Tucker Kraft. I'll admit, not the biggest Tucker Kraft fan. And it's not because of his efficiency, because his efficiency is good. It's the fact that I don't know if I see a clear path to more targets and a clear path to more receptions. He's going to be a guy that is going to be very up and down, in my opinion. He's going to have some really, really good weeks because of that efficiency, and then he's going to have some weeks where he just doesn't do a whole lot because Matthew Golden or Jaden Reed or Dontavian Wicks or whoever is going to end up getting the majority of the targets. Could Tucker Kraft be the number 2 target on this team? Absolutely. Is Matthew Golden going to be the number 1 target? Possibly. Where does Jaden Reed, Dontavian Wicks fall? These are the questions that are a little bit of a concern right now because Tucker Kraft could be the number 1 target on the team. He could be the number 5 target on the team on any given week. And with his efficiency being this good, it's not necessarily a bad investment for you, but it's definitely an investment that is going to be up and down. Tucker Kraft to me would be great for best ball, but in redraft leagues, I know the tight end position is not great to try and find people. I don't know if I'm willing to bank on all of his upside to give up a weekly floor that could end up hurting me more often. Isaiah Likely finishing this high is not shocking. We've talked about why already. Dallas Goedert finishing this high and Austin Hooper even finishing this high was quite shocking. Both of these guys not heavily utilized in their offenses. Austin Hooper is going to probably be behind Hunter Henry in New England, so I don't really see him getting a ton of volume. So even though he finished pretty decent across the board in terms of just overall efficiency, a lot of that may have to do with just the lack of volume. Dallas Goedert, kind of the same thing. His efficiency is very high. You've got A.J. Brown. You've got Devontae Smith. Obviously, you're running the ball with Saquon Barkley. You're running the ball with Jalen Hurts. So Dallas Goedert, at best, is the number 3 target on this team. And he's a guy that, while he can be efficient, we really need to see a little bit more consistent volume, and he needs to stay healthy. Jonnu Smith is the last guy in tier 1, and it was good to see his efficiency as high as it was, given the fact that he had so much volume last season. We've already discussed in this video why we have some concerns moving forward. Now we're going to move on to tier 2. And the next 2 guys on our list of who do we draft first overall at the tight end position show up here, number 1 and number 2 in tier 2 with Trey McBride and Brock Bowers. Now the question again with these guys is it's splitting hairs, because regardless if you pick one of these guys or not, they're probably going to end up being very good. For me, once again, it just goes back to George Kittle's going to be my tight end 1. Trey McBride is going to be my tight end 2 because his red zone usage. Brock Bowers is going to be my tight end 3 because I think Trey McBride and George Kittle just have a better opportunity this season to also score touchdowns on top of the volume they may have. Pat Freiermuth, have talked about him. I think he's in a good position this year. If he can keep his efficiency right in this area, but see more volume, I think he's definitely a guy that can go up draft boards, especially when it comes to scoring touchdowns. Mike Gesicki, another guy, would like to see a little bit more volume. If that defense is as bad as it looks like it could end up being for Cincinnati, they're going to be throwing the ball an awful lot, especially with that team needing to play the NFC North and some very good offenses there. A guy like Kyle Pitts, his efficiency seems to always be very good. but he still is not capitalizing. And even though his efficiency is not all that bad over the course of his career, he's not scoring enough touchdowns, and he's just not hauling in enough catches as it is. Juwan Johnson, kind of shocked to see him in tier 2. Not all that great. He definitely looked like a potential breakout candidate this past year. But a lot of those issues stem from wide receivers being hurt, quarterback being hurt. Who's going to be the quarterback this year? Is it going to be Spencer Rattler? Is it going to be Tyler Shuck? One of those guys could end up looking to Juwan Johnson a little bit more, but he's more of a best ball touchdown play for me. All right, moving on to tier 3. Which one of these tight ends, in my opinion, have the best chance to go into tier 2 or potentially tier 1? It's not Cole Kmet, not with the weapons that they have there, and definitely not with the fact that they just drafted a tight end inside the top 10. Zach Ertz at number 2 definitely could move up a little bit. The addition of Deebo Samuel in Washington could end up hurting his overall volume, but if his volume goes down and his efficiency goes up, he could still potentially find his way into tier 2 next year. TJ Hockenson, for me, when I take a look at this group, is the guy that probably moves into at least tier 2 next season. Yes, he could be the number 3 target in that offense. He could also be the number 2 target in that offense. And there's going to be a lot of people that are like, JJ McCarthy, can he get the job done? I continue to back my boy JJ. I'm a Michigan fan, so I watched him very closely for several years there. He's got all the tools needed to be a high upside quarterback at the NFL level, and TJ Hockenson should prosper from that. Even if he's the number 3 target behind Jordan Addison, he should still see enough work in this passing game with a coach like Kevin O'Connell to get him enough work that he can be decently efficient enough to jump into that tier 2 realm now that he would be fully healthy this season and not on his way back from an ACL tear. You have to hope that the next closest name to moving into tier 2 is Dalton Kincaid. And at this point, he's a guy that I just can't find myself heavily invested in. I would rather be a year late on Dalton Kincaid than continue to push a guy that has just been so underwhelming in his career so far, in an offense that really isn't any different from the last couple of years. And you've got a guy like Keon Coleman, who definitely could take another step moving forward, with Khalil Shakir being a very good playmaker. But then you've got Dawson Knox, who's still there as well. And that's where things get really hairy for the tight end position in Buffalo. All right, now we go down to the bottom tier. Not really going to dive into Jordan Akins all that much. Brenton Strange was in a really good position until they drafted Travis Hunter. For me, Brenton Strange is a guy that could be really close to like a Pat Freiermuth or like even like a Mark Andrews. Like total overall volume could be something that could be end up like hitting or miss at times. But then like it's his red zone and his touchdown usage that could end up going up this season. Last year when Evan Ingram was hurt, Trevor Lawrence was looking to Brenton Strange quite a bit at the beginning of the season. He popped up on the radar of a lot of fantasy owners early on. This year, even with the addition of Travis Hunter, Brenton Strange could still have enough red zone usage that he could find himself right around that top 12 area on a weekly basis. And anytime a tight end scores a touchdown, they're going to be a top 12 tight end. Travis Kelce, for me, I don't know if efficiency gets all that better. He doesn't move the way that he used to, and his upside is not there. If his touchdown numbers can be decent and he can see a decent amount of volume, this red efficiency isn't something that's still going to get any better, but his floor could still be decent enough to be a top 12 tight end. You know, Chigi Oko is a guy that he's got the athletic ability. I just don't know how he's going to be utilized in Tennessee, and I don't know if Cam Ward is going to look his way all that often. Tyler Conklin, he's going to be a same face, new place this year. How is he going to be utilized? David Njoku, he's going to be in a situation where if Joe Flacco's his quarterback, his efficiency will definitely get better. If Kenny Pickett is his quarterback, I don't know if it gets all that better. Evan Ingram, same face, new place, but we know that Sean Payton has wanted a playmaking tight end in Denver, so Evan Ingram could end up being that guy as long as he could stay healthy. If he can stay healthy, I could see him as the number 2 target behind behind Cortland Sutton, which would definitely give him tons of fantasy value and at least put him in tier 3 closer to tier 2. Dalton Schultz, I don't know if I really see him getting any better. They've really reset their wide receiver core there. The offensive line will be the biggest question mark. If they're not very good this year, then maybe we see some dump offs to Dalton Schultz, but I don't think he has enough big playability. And at the very bottom, Jake Ferguson. You know, last year was breakout potential for Jake Ferguson. He got hurt. Dak Prescott got hurt. This offensive line wasn't that good. The run game was so-so at times, even though towards the end of the season, Rico Dowdle kind of kicked it up a notch. So for me, Jake Ferguson last year was more about the offense, the quarterback, and just the inefficiencies as a whole. If everyone can stay healthy this year, Jake Ferguson is also a name at the bottom of this list that I feel like at least goes up to tier 2, especially if we see better efficiency, even if the overall volume numbers are not crazy good. All right, before we get out of here and end the video, let's talk about the biggest risers and fallers from where they ranked in the volume video to the efficiency video. And in this video, it stood out more than any of the other videos that we did. For the tight end position, typically the guys with the most volume saw the biggest drop when it came to efficiency. Now, there were a few guys that stand out. Sam Laporta, Mark Andrews, those were the two guys that have positive gains from volume to efficiency while still seeing quite a bit of volume. Tucker Kraft was another guy, decent volume. He still saw a positive gain in the efficiency video. But again, you take a look at, so the number one scorer from the volume video, George Kittle, he was number one in efficiency, so he stays right there. But then the number 6, Trey McBride, he fell. The number 2, Jonnu Smith fell. The number 3, Brock Bowers fell. The number 5, Zach Ertz fell. The number 4, Travis Kelce, had the biggest drop. He dropped 21 spots all the way down here to last after being 4th in the other video. That's a big change. So for me, when I take a look at what these guys did here, it's you know, it's tough. It's tough to look at the tight end position and see how underutilized it is sometimes by some teams and how heavily utilized it is sometimes by other teams. It's clear when you have a really good tight end and you utilize him correctly, it changes the entire dynamic of your offense, but there's not enough teams that are actually utilizing the tight end position in that way. And until that happens and we start to see that more often, fantasy football is going to be really tough to figure out when it comes to the tight end position. But in 2025, you're in luck. The Tight End Whisperer will be right here with the Fantasy Headliner still, trying to help you make all of your tight end decisions. Don't forget to go down to the link below, get our draft guide. You're going to want to start studying as soon as possible. Headliner Nation, I appreciate y'all being here. Stay safe and healthy. I'll catch you all in the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.